All right, I've got my second segment sip, and we are ready to roll. So Oregon comes in up one spot from a week ago in the latest playoff rankings from the committee. They are at number 7. They're behind Ole Miss at 6, Texas Tech at 5, Georgia 4, Texas A&M 3, Indiana 2, and Ohio State at number 1. I am pleasantly surprised that this was the outcome. I was fully prepared mentally for Oregon to be behind a 2-loss Oklahoma team, which would have looked strange to be sure. It's just that Oklahoma pulled off a victory over the weekend that is better than a victory that Oregon has. And what the committee has been telling all of us in the college football world for the last couple of weeks with their rankings, I think more than the other side of this conversation, they're wanting to reward wins more than they're wanting to punish losses. It's why Tulane is the group of 5 representative right now in the top 25. They have a couple of Power 4 wins, and they beat Memphis, who's a top G5 team. That is outweighing their loss to UTSA on the road, and the Ole Miss one just kind of gets disregarded, but that's outweighing their loss to UTSA on the road, which was really bad because they lost in pretty big fashion. But you look at Alabama, who has 2 losses. They have a bunch of good wins, but one of their losses is good, not great because it was at home, but a good loss for whatever that's worth to Oklahoma. And then you have a horrible loss, and they're just not really getting punished in a severe way. They're being more rewarded for their win. So bringing this back to Oregon, yes, winning the next 2 games ensures Oregon is in the college football playoff. I think it all but ensures they'd get a home playoff game because that'll be for the teams that are seeded 5 through 8 in the committee's final rankings. And I don't see Oklahoma that plays LSU and Missouri, who are both, Missouri's actually back in the top 25 this week. They're a fringe team in that regard. LSU is got a talented roster, but an interim head coach and, is kind of the equivalent of Penn State at the moment, where it's like, their potential's there, but what exactly is the coaching situation, and their concerns are with who's going to be their next head coach. But Oregon sitting there at 9-1 tells me that 11-1, I don't think anyone would leap past them. Notre Dame doesn't have an opponent that could put them over the top. BYU could, but I think if the Cougars were to rematch with Texas Tech, who's ahead of Oregon right now, in the Big 12 championship game, win that and go ahead of the Ducks, I think Texas Tech would fall behind Oregon in that scenario because initially the committee liked the Big 12, but with these rankings, I don't know if the committee's liking the Big 12 quite as much because BYU beat Utah and is just 1 spot ahead of the Utes. And if the playoff ended today because of auto bids from the group of 5 and ACC champions, BYU and Utah would both be out. Now, there's a lot of football still to be played on that regard, but BYU is 1 slot ahead of Utah. Notre Dame is 4 slots ahead of Miami, who Miami beat. Miami, I didn't phrase that very well. Let me start over, okay? Do over. Take 2. BYU beat Utah and has a better record. They are 1 slot ahead of the Utes. Notre Dame lost to Miami. They have the same record, and Notre Dame is 4 slots ahead of the Hurricanes. Now, I don't believe that Notre Dame is going to be able to climb past Oregon because they don't have a high-level opponent remaining on their schedule. And I don't think that maybe Oklahoma could, but bottom line is if Oregon wins out, they will have a home playoff game, which is great. That has been my goal from the moment this season began. If they beat USC and beat Washington, obviously, first and foremost, it'll be great to win those rivalry matchups because I think that's something that we all value a whole heck of a lot, watching and following Oregon football for a long time. But the playoff implications come down to, will Oregon get a home playoff game? And if they were to drop one, especially USC, I think there's a greater urgency and it's a better outcome if they're going to go 10-2. Again, that's an if because I think they're going to win the next 2 games. Let's say they don't. It is better to beat USC and lose to Washington because the committee is looking for those quality wins, and USC is ranked number 15. If they were to lose to Oregon on the road, I think they'd still be ranked inside the top 20. So having that top 20 win, I think would help you more for what this committee's told us so far than a loss at Washington in a rivalry game would hurt the Ducks and their resume. But The other thing that is manifesting itself, and I talked about this in the second segment of Locked On College Football today more extensively, so if you want to hear more thoughts, you can go check that out. But I will briefly summarize here. Right now, these things tend to work themselves out, but 1 year maybe they don't. There is setting up to be a potential massive, I mean ginormous logjam of 10-2 teams. That is on the table. Maybe chaos ensues. There are a couple head-to-heads, I think, that will require that it's not the case, especially when you get to conference championship games. But you could have, let's say Oregon loses to USC. The ramifications on the playoff, again, here's the second reason why it would be worse than losing to Washington but beating USC. Even if emotionally you want to beat Washington more than USC, I know that you guys and myself included want to beat them both. But if USC can then get into the fold as a 10-2 and be another team in there, here are teams that could wind up 10-2 at the end of the season. Oklahoma, who Oregon is currently ranked one spot ahead of. And I don't know if the Sooners even, because they're not making the SEC championship game. Now that I think about it, I don't think they would jump Oregon, because if the Ducks were to go at 10-2, they would. So let's say Oregon winds up 10-2. Oklahoma could go 10-2. Notre Dame could go 10-2. Alabama could be at 10-2. BYU and Utah could both be at 10-2. Miami could be at 10-2 with a win over Notre Dame, which if Oregon doesn't beat USC would be better than any single win currently than what Oregon has on their resume. Michigan could be 10-2 if they were to wind up beating Ohio State. Vanderbilt could be 10-2. I'm not even done. Those are just a handful of the teams that could wind up at 10-2. You could have a logjam like we have not seen before, and I don't know that Oregon would win the resume battle over all of those teams, especially if they lose to USC. But even if they beat USC, lose to Washington, I don't know that they would win that particular matchup. So I don't think this was a bad outcome for Oregon because they're ahead of Oklahoma at least. So they should control their own fate to get a home playoff game and stay ahead of the Sooners and Notre Dame. If they win their next two games, of course, they'll be in. And I don't think they could get dropped down to have a road playoff game. Definitely not. But. I definitely, as things have continued to materialize and play out, I feel less confident than I did a week ago or even earlier this week, frankly, that Oregon at 10-2 makes the playoff. That is definitely something to note. So, one of you asked me about the impact both on and off the field in terms of recruiting for this game against USC, which is kind of like sprinkles on top of the cake. It's not the cake or the icing even, but I think it's maybe the sprinkles. In the 2026 class, USC's got 35 commits. Oregon is now up to 19 because they picked one up the other day. They landed Hudson Lewis, 5'10", 175-pound receiver from Boise, Idaho, class 26. 3-star recruit, not a super highly rated guy. He is the number 189 receiver in the country, according to the 24/7 composite. He was committed to Utah, flipped to the Ducks. All I can see when I watch his highlight film is Charles Nelson. He plays both ways. Charles Nelson did that in his day. He's small. He's shifty. I think there is some upside there, to be sure. I don't think I expect him to be a big-time recruit, but certainly he's a guy who can play a factor in the return game as well. I could see him carving out a role on special teams for the Ducks when he gets to campus, but nice, solid pickup for Ross Douglas. Nothing incredible or groundbreaking, not exactly Ja'Cory Moore, but this game, Oregon and USC, the recruiting impact, I think it's measurable. I don't think it's seismic because these two schools have established themselves brand-wise in such a big way. I think that USC benefits from a win over Oregon on the recruiting trail more than Oregon benefits from a win because the Ducks' brand of recruiting over the last several years has been stronger than USC's, without question. Now in the 26 cycle, Lincoln Riley and their GM, Chad Bowden, that came from Notre Dame, have suddenly gotten serious about it, and they have the number one class in 24/7's rankings. So I think it's more about thwarting, from a recruiting angle, just on that side of things with this game. I think it's more about thwarting USC's momentum than it is building a lot more because Oregon still has a top 5 class in the 2026 cycle. And signing day is just over a month away at the end of December. The early signing window, that is. Then the portal will open in early January for a couple of weeks before the national championship, but after, all the bowl games and such. So I think there's definitely an impact for sure. I don't think it's groundbreaking one way or the other. And I think it's a bigger opportunity for USC to show something to recruits, because I think Oregon's already had a lot of those moments, whether it's Penn State or heck, even Iowa to a degree. I think they've just had a lot of those games. Ohio State last year, USC's looking for that moment. Oregon's looking for another reason to show people, or another opportunity to show people, hey, what we're doing is working. This is why you should come here. Look at all the guys that we've recruited, retained, and developed over the years. And USC is looking for what would probably be the biggest win in the Lincoln Riley era. So that's how I view the recruiting angle in this one.